A demon that haunts Ouija boards, threatening those unfortunate enough to come into contact with them. Cloven hoof tracks imprinted on hundreds of miles of snow. Hooded figures knocking on doors in the dead of night, bringing with them omens of death. These are the demons Ed and Lorraine Warren should have warned us about. Zozo is a name that's become infamous in the world of paranormal activity, especially when it comes to Ouija boards. The legend of Zozo's been around for a long time, but in terms of modern internet popularity, it all started in 2009, when a man named Darren Evans wrote about his supposed experience with a demon on an internet forum for true ghost stories. He said that he'd been using a Ouija board and asked if there was any spirits or entities in the room. The planchette went nuts, going back and forth between the letters Z and O. Then it told him it was going to take his family to paradise, and when he asked what the entity meant, it spelled out hell. A whole bunch of commenters then responded, saying they'd also had run-ins with Zozo during their Ouija board sessions. People will often say Zozo might appear playful at first, before quickly turning sinister. Once Zozo has established contact, the experiences often escalate to disturbing messages, threats, or aggressive behavior. Reports from those who have dealt with Zozo include sudden mood swings and even full-on physical attacks. What's particularly unsettling is that Zozo seems to show up across different locations, meaning it's not just some local urban legend. People from all over the world have claimed to encounter Zozo. The Black Monk of Pontefract. In the late 60s and early 70s, the Pritchard family, who lived in a house at 30 East Drive on the Checkfield estate in Pontefract, England, began experiencing strange things in their home. The troubles began almost as soon as they moved in. Family, friends were visiting one day when the wife felt an icy breeze. The husband saw white powder falling from the air. But things only got stranger from there. The kitchen floor would often have unexplained puddles of water on it. They even called in a plumber who couldn't seem to explain what was going on. One night, Jean Pritchard and her son were so scared they left the house altogether to stay with a neighbor. They'd witnessed a heavy chest of drawers swaying on its own. But then everything just stopped. For about 2 years. The Pritchards were understandably relieved. Little did they know the activity would resume, and more violently than before. After this sudden lull in activity, the haunting came back, with loud crashes and objects moving on their own. Diane Pritchard, the Pritchard's daughter, claimed she was thrown out of her bed and dragged up the stairs by an invisible force, leaving lacerations on her neck. They even tried to use holy water to cleanse the house. Instead of peace, though, the family reported that the poltergeist, or whatever this thing was, responded by painting upside-down crosses on the walls and doors and destroyed crucifixes in the home. Joe and Jean Pritchard even claimed to see a black cloaked figure with a cowl appearing over their bed, hence the entity being dubbed the Black Monk of Pontefract. On a cold February night in 1855, something bizarre was reported in Devon, England. The so-called Devil's Footprints were a series of unexplained tracks that appeared overnight in the snow. The tracks were reported looking a lot like cloven hooves, and they went on for about 100 miles, crossing over frozen rivers, rooftops, and even walls. Locals were petrified. How were these tracks not only visible on the ground, but also crossing over obstacles like walls and fences without leaving a trace of how they might have gotten over them? When news hit the paper, people were completely flabbergasted. One section read, "It appears on Thursday last night there was a very heavy snowfall in the neighborhood of Exeter in the south of Devon. On the following morning, the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the footmarks of some strange and mysterious animal endowed with the power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of unaccountable places, on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, as well in open fields. The superstitious go as far as to believe that they are the marks of Satan himself." So what happened here? Well, one theory is that it was all just a hoax, but how could someone have made the cloven footprints without making any prints of their own? And even if they did manage to find a way, they'd have had to go through quite the effort. To this day, no conclusive evidence was ever found to explain these footprints. The Kumakotok, or door knockers, are told of in Philippine folklore. They're said to appear in the dead of night. They're described as robed figures with their faces obscured by hoods. The trio usually consists of a young woman, a middle-aged man, and an elderly man. It's said that their presence is often associated with death and misfortune. The legend goes that regardless of whether someone even answers the door, the mere visit from the Kumakotok signals impending doom. Typically, the omen is said to affect someone in the household, especially if that person is elderly or already in poor health. There's a belief that the Kumakotok's visit is a sign that death is on its way. As you can imagine, stories of the ominous hooded entities became more widespread during times of big disease outbreaks. In an attempt to ward off the trio, people started painting white crosses on their doors, and this seemed to make them shift their focus from private homes to public buildings like hospitals, government offices, and churches. It's said that the sightings of the Kumakotok have died down since World War II, but the legend continues to be a part of local folklore. In November of 2006, Amy Stamatis, a nurse working at Baptist Health Medical Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, suddenly, strangely, just lost her ability to do her job, which led her to quit. Now, along with this, her physical abilities sharply declined. She couldn't run anymore, for example, a passion she'd had her entire life. And as her mental health continued to deteriorate, she started displaying erratic behavior. She started having public outbursts and would yell at family and friends, seemingly out of nowhere. Then she was seen climbing a 7-story parking ramp, planning to jump, but the police managed to convince her to come down. Later that year, though, Amy did succeed in jumping from her 2nd-story window, which left her paralyzed from the waist down. While she was recovering in the hospital, she was visited by a woman named Cindy Lawson, a Pentecostal evangelist, who made her a very odd offer, an offer she just couldn't refuse. Cindy claimed that she had experience in performing exorcisms. She also believed that Amy was possessed by demons and felt compelled to help her. Lawson claimed to have seen pretty wild things in her previous exorcisms, like people's eye color changing. They'd foam at the mouth, speak in strange demonic voices, but Amy agreed to let Lawson perform an exorcism on her anyway, as scary as it sounded. Amy claimed she didn't remember the exorcism itself, but her family said there was a significant change in her behavior afterward. Unfortunately, she was still paralyzed, but said her outlook had totally changed for the better. The Gottliebin Dittus case is a supposed case of a real-life demonic possession. It's pretty well documented, but surprisingly not talked about very often, despite some of the crazy stuff that was said to have gone on. A woman named Gottliebin Dittus was reportedly possessed by multiple demons. Dittus was born in the early 1800s and lived in the town of Mottlingen. In 1842, she began exhibiting some strange and violent behavior, which she, her family, and virtually the entire neighborhood interpreted as signs of demonic possession. Reports say she would have these violent outbursts, speak in languages she didn't know, and show extreme physical strength. Her condition worsened over time until the family turned to the church for help. A pastor named Johann Christoph Blumhardt began carrying out a series of exorcisms to rid her of the demons she claimed had taken hold of her. Supposedly, during these exorcisms, Dittus would exhibit supernatural abilities. She'd levitate and, most gruesomely, vomit things up like bits of glass and nails. And after a long series of exorcisms, Gottliebin finally claimed to be free in 1843. Spring-heeled Jack is one of the most bizarre cases in all of Britain. The legend dates back to the 19th century, the earliest reports appearing in the 1830s. About 50 years before Jack the Ripper was terrorizing the streets, there was a possibly inhuman entity known as Spring-heeled Jack, a mysterious menace who could leap great distances and heights. He was said to wear a dark cloak and a hat, sometimes with devilish horns. Some accounts even describe him having glowing red eyes. It said he would leap out of the shadows to attack unsuspecting victims. He was seen in various locations, especially around London, and his attacks often involved him scratching at his victims before leaping back into the shadows. No one was ever caught or identified as Spring-heeled Jack, but stories became widespread. He was talked about in newspapers across the country. At one point, there were cases being reported as far as Scotland. So was this a case of a sadistic criminal dressing up as a demonic bat, running off into the night to cause mayhem? Were there copycats? Was this just a case of mass hysteria? Or was there really a demon stalking the streets for that brief moment in time? Every facility with a public bathroom on Earth needs to pay very close attention to this next point. Akaname is a Japanese demon who might just be the creepiest bathroom helper you'll ever hear of. It's a toilet-dwelling, goblin-like creature with slimy hair and these long, nasty toenails. Its tongue is also long and covered in gross, poisonous saliva. Probably the last thing you'd ever want to see when sitting down to do your business. Luckily though, Akaname isn't as dangerous as he looks. The entity is known as the Liquor of Filth, not a nickname anyone would probably want to have, but he cleans up messes in bathrooms. He's attracted to grime and scum, and his main job is to lick up all that nasty stuff. Clearly, he doesn't show up in some of the public bathrooms in these parts. Why can't we have a toilet cleaning yokai in this country? I would actually kind of welcome having a golem creature crawling around in the bathrooms if it meant avoiding some of the just downright horrendous things I've seen in public bathrooms over the years. People are just animals. I gotta imagine that this was created as a scare tactic to get youngsters to keep the bathroom clean, and you know what, hey, if it works, some folks could have used some more scaring when they were young, I think. In the quiet town of Hannibal, Missouri is the Mark Twain Cave, and people come from all over the world to see it because it's a cave he's referenced in his work. According to a tale though, there's a demon that's said to dwell in the shadows of the cave. The legend mainly stems from this vast pit with a seemingly endless drop. It's the pit that famously inspired the dramatic death scene of Injun Joe in Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The seemingly endless pit does make for the perfect place for a hellish entity to crawl out of. I could see where the stories come from. Finally though, we have the Mahaha from Inuit folklore. This thing is absolutely twisted. It's almost like the Joker if he was closer to a wild animal and somehow even more sadistic and cruel. A Mahaha is a demonic spirit with a permanent ghastly grin plastered on its face. They're tall, they're thin, they're creatures with terrifyingly wide mouths and long, sharp fingers, which will come into play later. The Mahaha hunts down its victims in the dead of winter, and once it finds someone, it doesn't finish them off quickly. That just wouldn't be fun enough. It plays with them first, using its icy fingers to tickle them until the victim is cut to ribbons by their sharp claws, or they just die from sheer exhaustion, fright, and exposure. So if you ever find yourself out in the freezing Arctic and hear the sound of someone or something chuckling in the distance, you might want to run. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.